Well, hello and welcome to our New Year 2020 episode. It's safe to say we've all had a rather filling Christmas period. I know I have. Far too many chocolates, far too many sausage rolls, and the list is endless. Matt, how are you on this New Year time?
Well, I mean, it's post-Christmas, isn't it? So essentially, I'm nursing a food baby, as is traditional at this time of year. So very full, absolutely. Just me and Mum for Christmas Day this year, so it was very chilled out, very nice. And I was actually Boxing Day I spent on my own, and then had a bite to eat with Lisa and Lee, some friends of mine, and yeah, that's pretty much about it, really. Just very chilled out. Nev, how about you? What were you doing?
Yes, I'm in a similar position. I've been in a food coma since the 23rd of December, roughly. Right. And the diet starts, immediately, frankly speaking.
Yes, I think we're all in that boat, Nev, I think, to be fair. Yeah.
But, a nice Christmas, a quiet one, which I needed, just at home with me and Sue, and looking forward to 2020.
Very much so. What about you, Armando? What have you got planned for New Year, and what's been the highlights for you in 2019?
Well, 2019 has been a year of change for us. Everything from retiring. Well, I guess we started by getting married.
Yeah, technically, that's a highlight, certainly.
On the last day of 2018, we got married, so we started off the new year as a newly married couple.
Yeah. And then very quickly we bought a house, retired from the military, got some new jobs,
moved in together.
Yeah.
Became co-parents.
Went to Oshkosh.
Got a dog.
Yeah. Oshkosh, Reno. We got a dog, just doing the whole family life thing. And it's just been a wonderful transition. I know there's a lot of people in aviation that do it because they love it. And there's so many times where I listen to people that want to get into aviation. You certainly couldn't do it without somebody there to support you. So I wouldn't have been able to do everything that I've done in 2019 without Megan's support. So that's probably the biggest highlight of 2019 is just Megan and Maddie, and Lois Lane, who's hanging out back there by the fire.
I should just stress, I would like her to chill out a bit more. She looks
She's
very angry.
pooped from the holidays.
Right. yeah, absolutely. Far too much turkey and tinsel for her, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess looking forward to 2020 is going to be hopefully not as much change, but
I don't know. I mean, you say that though. There's quite a big change coming up for both of you in the fact that obviously, I mean, your role is, I don't know. I mean, it must be difficult for you, Megan, as well, looking at ways, because obviously, hopefully, you're going to be in the air soon, Armando, flying for a legacy carrier to a degree, or not legacy carrier. That's not the word I'm looking for, is it? But it's a regional jet. What is it that I screwed that up? Oh, balls.
There will be a big shift in our family life, that's for sure. Yeah. I mean, we were used to only seeing Armando like on vacations when he was in the military, and then since he's been retired, I mean, we've had him home the majority of the time, so now this is going to be in between. He'll be here, he won't be here, and we'll just have to adjust our family life, which is a new challenge that we're looking forward to.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, exciting as well, though, right? I mean, this is
exciting.
What
he's living the dream now.
Yeah, too right, absolutely. And but like you say, without the support of someone like Megan, obviously, then these things can't be done, can they? So it's exciting, I suppose. But a lot of people, that is the dream, isn't it? Where they leave the military and they want to get a flying job, sort of off the back of it. And you've certainly managed to pull that off between you.
Yeah, not just the military and not just aviation. It is proof that, often I think we have these dreams and goals, and life happens and we tend to sort of veer away from that path. But eventually it's just proof that with the right support and the right motivation and drive, you can get back to that path. And I guess it sounds kind of corny, but don't stop following your dreams. This is the perfect, the perfect proof.
Don't stop believing.
I feel like that's my ringtone.
Yeah. If it's not, it should be. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's not just me. Megan is doing the same thing, and I'm supporting her, and in her academic pursuits and just our family goals and dreams. So it's easy to get derailed, I think, and sometimes that's necessary. But I hope to show people that you can follow your dreams. You just have to do it, with the right plan and the right support.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Nev, I have to ask the question because I'm sure everyone is gagging to know. Did you get a car washing kit for Christmas?
No, I didn't. No, because the thing is, I've got so many car washing items in my garage that I think I could sell Halfords some.
With everything that's needed. Okay.
Other car retailers are available.
Of course, yeah, absolutely goes without saying. Yeah.
No, I didn't. No, so just some small gifts between me and Sue this year. Nothing too extravagant.
Some socks. I'm glad to hear it.
Yes, socks and pants. They're compulsory, and smellies. Obviously, Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without smellies. Let's be honest.
and it's safe to say, Matt. Obviously, being the proud owner of a new shiny new
very much
newish car.
Yeah.
You obviously already treated yourself to a full bootload of cleaning materials.
Do you know what? Actually, all jokes aside, it's genuinely the first time that I've had a car that I'm actually proud to have. And I bought one of these fancy. I mean, the novelty will soon wear off. Don't get me wrong, but I bought this fancy car boot tidy thing that's got all my cleaning stuff that lives in a nice little container, which is great. So when you need to empty the boot, you can just pick it up and take it all out. It's great. It's just been an amazing year, hasn't it? Really, it really has.
So we've got lots to pack into the show today. Not the news this week on this week's show, but we've got lots of little segments to put in on the show this week. And coming up first, we're going to hand things over to Nev to introduce the first part of this New Year's show.
So excited about this.
And this, for me, because obviously being the hosts of the show, we get privy to first dibs on viewing this. So I look, obviously me and Matt watched this when it went into the Dropbox. I'm sure Armando did. And I also just sent a little swift link off to my dad who watched it.
Did you? Now that's very naughty.
He absolutely loved it. But Nev, what's coming up next?
Well, we're very lucky because I sent an email to Captain John Hutchinson some months ago and asked him if we could do an interview with him. Now, John worked for British Airways for many years and spent 15 years on Concorde. But we managed to get him into a very chatty mode, I have to say. And obviously, John's career goes way back before he was on Concorde, back in 1977, when he was with the RAF. So we got our intrepid RAF pilot, Nick Anderson, to interview him. And this is going to be a fascinating series, let me tell you.
John Hutchinson has had, by any measure, a wonderful flying career. From his post-war start on Harvards through such classic aircraft as the Shackleton, the Boeing 707, the Boeing 747, the Vickers VC-10 and the iconic supersonic transport aircraft the Concorde, he has spent more time at Mach 2 than most military pilots. We talked to him about his book, The Wind Beneath My Wings. I'm here to talk to John Hutchinson about his marvellous life and your fabulous book, John. So thank you very much indeed for letting us come to speak to you today.
Well, it's a great pleasure, Nick. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. I'm going to fire straight off with the first questions, and I'm really trying to pick areas of the book that you might not have discussed before and that particularly piqued my interest. But the first thing I noted was that you were brought up in India during a fascinating period of history. The partition of India and Pakistan, the handing over of India, or the India moving from previous control of the British Empire. How much do you think your early life moulded your the person you have become?
What an interesting question. What I'll say to start with is that it was fascinating. My father was in the Indian Army. He was a colonel. He was the archetypal Indian Army colonel. And he spent the 1930s up and down the northwest frontier.
Oh, wow, that's
places
been brilliant.
like Gilgit and Fort Sandeman and all these places. And the great fear was that the Russians would come into India through Afghanistan. Second World War came, and Dad was reassigned to sort of staff duties. And at the end of the war, as we started going into the business of partition, he worked under Mountbatten up in Shimla, I suppose I should say now. And I have to say he had very little time for Mountbatten. He didn't like him at all. He thought he was a rather pompous man and was a bit full of himself, but there we are, that's another story. But my memories of India, all my mates were Indians. There weren't any other boys of my age around who were white. So, I grew up with Indians, and I can remember, for instance, in the winter, they used to flood the tennis courts in Shimla, and that became the ice skating rink.
It was that cold?
It jolly well was. It's only 7,000 feet up in the Himalayas.
Well, not many people would have thought that.
No. It's very cold. I mean, there was one winter when they had so much snow that the railway station subsided, collapsed under the weight of snow. I'm not kidding. That was the winter of 1947, I think, 46 into 47. And I used to sit in our house looking down on the tennis court and wait for the red balloon to be hoisted, indicating that the skating rink was fit for duty. I'd go down there and I'd spend the day skating with all these Indian mates of mine. So the business of sort of colour, it's quite interesting. In the last year or two, there's been all sorts of comments about the role of the British in India, and really rather sort of hostile criticism. All I can tell you is that I never saw any of that at all. Our servants were part of our family, and I remember when our ayah, our nanny, who almost was my surrogate mother, I mean, she looked after me more than my mother did, to be perfectly frank. I can remember Dad taking her off to the railway station to put her on a train to go to what is now Pakistan. She was in tears. We were in tears. I mean, it was saying goodbye to a member of our family. And I will never know to this day whether or not she ever survived that journey. Because those trains used to get ambushed and they'd all be slaughtered. I mean, the killing that went on during partition was absolute, on a monumental scale. It really was. But none of it was directed towards the Brits. It was all Hindu, Muslim.
But being part of that, do you think it made you a stronger person?
So how did it mould my life subsequently? That's a very difficult... For a start, race isn't an issue with me. I mean, to me, I've always been used to the whole concept of sort of racism is something is really, to me, quite foreign. So I suppose that's one effect it had on me. I suppose the sort of this isn't really India. This is more my family sort of upbringing, which was very strict and a very disciplined environment. That carried me through in very good stead when I joined the Royal Air Force, I suppose. Discipline was something I was sort of used to.
Excellent. It's interesting. Of your schooling, you wrote in the book I knew how much work I would have to do to be able to join the RAF. I did the minimum amount necessary, which I loved. What's your advice nowadays to those thinking of making a career for themselves in aviation?
I would say don't do the minimum necessary. I'd go for broke and do as much as you possibly can.
Excellent.
Because it's such a competitive world now, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, when I came onto the scene in 1955, you could grandly look around and survey the scene and think, oh, I'll be a doctor or this or that or the next thing. And it was just a totally different world. But I never wanted to be anything else other than an RAF pilot.
I don't blame you. I see you started your flying training in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and that's a fairly remote place, but once you must have flown over it later in your life, perhaps on a route, say, to San Francisco or somewhere. What memories did that bring back as you were sitting on your 747 looking down?
I never want to see Moose Jaw ever again in my life. It was a fantastic place for a flying training school. It was about 50 miles north of the US border. It had a tremendous reputation in the Prohibition era.
Oh, wow.
Because the Americans would all flood across the Canadian border and buy their booze in Moose Jaw. And it was all, I mean, they had saloon bars with all these sort of swing doors and things, just like you see in
that must
a
be
Western.
fabulous.
But it was as flat as a pancake. The roads either went north, south or east, west. If you got lost, all you did was fly down low level in your Harvard until you came past a grain elevator, and all the grain elevators had the name of the little settlement painted on the side of the grain elevator, and you then found that on your map. There you were. You now knew how to get home, back to Moose Jaw. So it was a fabulous place from a flying training point of view. But the weather, I mean, the weather was good in flying terms, probably 75-80% of the time. And then it was so bad that you couldn't possibly consider flying. There was sort of no in-betweens. But the temperatures, I mean, in the summer it would get up to plus 40, and in the winter minus 40. And, you know, you could feel your nose freezing up as you breathed air in through your nose. You did not breathe in through your mouth in those sort of temperatures. You breathe through your nose to avoid sort of freezing your lungs up.
I guess you had to do survival courses in case you jumped out in the bush, as it were.
Funny enough, I didn't do a survival course until I'd got my wings and finished my flying training. And then I did the survival course.
Perhaps they considered you expendable up to that point.
Back to front, isn't it?
I would have thought so. Oh, I like that very much. Now, despite your ambivalent feelings towards Moose Jaw, you seemed as if your intense passion for the joys of flying blossomed there.
Yeah, I had a very difficult time to start with. I had a very unforgiving instructor. Bear in mind, I was at this stage 18 and a half. I'd never driven a car. I was very immature, quite frankly. And to be presented with a Harvard as your ab initio trainer is quite a challenge. I mean, it's a big lump of metal, a Harvard.
Powerful too.
And powerful. And it had vices, you know, it would flick stall, tip up on its nose, no trouble at all, ground loop on landing, no trouble at all.
Aye.
Had all sorts of little vices to catch you out. And I did my first test. It was called the preliminary Clarehood test at 15 hours, and I failed it comprehensively. So I was now sort of under review for the chop, and I was reassigned a different instructor who was a completely different kettle of fish, and he just built up my confidence. And then it took me about 23 hours to go solo, something like that, 24 hours, and he sent me solo. And then shortly after that, something clicked. I don't know what it was. The hand-eye coordination suddenly clicked, and I have never, ever looked back on a course since. I've never had any problems with any course since. You know, it gave me a tremendous grounding, the Harvard. And I think my sort of moral of that story would be that if you could fly a Harvard, you could sort of more or less fly anything.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Nowadays, trainers seem to be very benign, and I wonder sometimes if that's the right way around.
As an ex-flying instructor, I would totally agree with that. My last 3 years in the Air Force was instructing on jet provost, which is incredibly benign. And I think you yourself went on to fallen gnats, if I
That's right,
heard
yes.
it all correctly.
Yeah.
And going from a jet provost to a fallen gnat was a quantum leap.
Yeah.
Which you probably weren't really properly prepared for.
But luckily we all survived.
Well, I tell you what, Nev, you've done astounding work there with Nick, and I have to make a quick note on that actual video that Nick and John were wearing fairly matching socks.
Yes, that obviously what they must have got them for their birthdays or Christmas or something like that.
Yeah,
but,
was that the memo you sent round beforehand? They must have matching.
Yeah,
socks.
that's it.
Yeah.
But as you can tell, John is a very interesting character indeed, and there will be many more parts of this interview to play out over the coming weeks. So,
do you know what I love about the interview? This is the great thing with, and we're so lucky that Nick's willing to do bits for us. Obviously, is how he knows when to shut up. And I know that I don't mean that in an unkind way. Do you know what I mean? He knows when to just let the guest sort of tell the story. Do you know what I mean? No interruptions or anything. It's brilliant. I can't wait for part 2. And part 2, if I recall, Nev, we're actually sharing at our 300th episode.
Yes, we're going to play part 2 on the 11th of January at the Renaissance at Heathrow. So whoever's going to be there on that occasion will be able to see part 2. And actually, if you thought part 1 was good, part 2 is even better. It's a very, very interesting watch and listen.
Absolutely.
Now, Nev, I've got to ask this question. Being the amazing cameraman that you are, on that piece that you done there, were those strategically placed, the painting and the model, or was that were they already there?
There was a bit of strategic placement, but the slight fail on my part was that it showed a lot of reflection, so you could actually see the tripod of the camera and me moving around a bit. But as if it's an audio podcast you're listening to, you'll be none the wiser.
You'll be absolutely none the wiser. Absolutely. I think they call it set dressing, don't they, Nev, when you do stuff like that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, we mentioned briefly there the 300th. I think it's worth mentioning. Nev and I had a little recce. We went up to, or down to, sorry, for I don't know. It depends on which part of the country you're coming
sideways.
Sideways. We went to London basically, and Nev and I met for breakfast, and we got the opportunity to have a look through the go into the function room, have a look, and we had a little chat while we were there. Well, if you were watching the show last night, or the Christmas show that we recorded last night, I should just say, then you'll know that myself and Nev were off for a breakfast meeting in London today to come and have a look at the room we're going to be using for our 300th at the Renaissance. And I have to say, one of the things that has been so difficult about setting up, just doing this little piece to camera now, is we have both been distracted by essentially the view that we have just there. There's been 747s. What have we got taking off now? What's that, Nev?
That's a 767-400 of Delta Airlines.
That was a Delta, wasn't it? Yes, because you smashed the quiz last night, it has to be said, when it came to stuff like that. But great to see some fantastic views here at the room. I mean, I think we're going to have a lot of very happy punters. So
I hope people can concentrate on the show, because they'll be looking out of the window most of the time.
I think it'll do us a favour, if I'm honest. Nev,
I think you're right.
They're busy staring out of the window. All they'll remember is how good it was out there, and not what we were saying, which is great. Seriously, guys, really cannot wait for the 300th now. It's going to be so exciting. The guys here at the Renaissance have been so accommodating. We've got a fantastic day ahead. So if you aren't on the guest list, then you need to get in touch. Podcast at planetalkinguk.com. That's podcast at planetalkinguk.com. You need to send us a quick email and say, yes, I'd like to come to the 300th. We can pop you on the list. And you can come and join us for what promises to be a really interesting day. We've got a couple of things planned that I can't really tell you about yet beforehand, hopefully, before we then do the live show just after lunch, and then hopefully a nice little meal for all those that are about after.
Yeah, speaking of food, what do we think about the breakfast?
Yes. Absolutely, yes. I had a cheese course first because I'm a little bit different. This is slightly Owen's fault, I have to be honest, but I'm rather partial to the continentally sort of German style with the sausage meats and all that kind of stuff.
And then the full English afterwards.
Shh, let's keep that a bit quiet. Yeah. I'm on a diet. Seafood diet.
Well,
anyway.
This is a superb venue, and I'm really glad we've chosen to be here. It's obviously very central for a lot of people as well.
Yeah.
But
good transport links, no excuse. Yeah,
really looking forward to it. So we should have a great time, shouldn't we?
Yeah, can't wait. So January the 11th, starting from about 10 a.m. Yes, come to the Renaissance in London. It's on the Bath Road, literally overlooking the runways at Heathrow.
So don't forget, everyone, we want to see you at the 300. There's going to be an absolutely awesome show with some very special guests.
Very special
guests. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So if you want to join us on the 11th of January next year, make sure you get those emails in to us here at PTUK. So, Nev, handing things over to you again for a little kind of trip down memory lane.
Yeah, we'll call it another chance to see, shall we?
Yes, we will. And of course, you may have seen that we were at Biggin Hill earlier this year, and we met up with Tony De Bruyn, and he's one of the main OV-10 Bronco display pilots, and he's also the driving force behind the Bronco Demo Team. He's passionate about aviation since his early childhood. He's now a commercial pilot with over 5,000 flying hours to his credit. And Tony loves displaying the Bronco, showing the airplane at its best as a rugged STOL performer with its awesome agility and fully aerobatic capabilities. And Carlos spoke to Tony at Biggin Hill earlier this year.
So look behind me here, because I'm standing in front of, one of the most awesome aircraft I think we've seen here at the display today at the Biggin Hill Festival of Flight. And I'm here with Tony. Tony, tell us a bit about this aircraft. What is this amazing aircraft behind us?
It's an amazing airplane. That's totally on the ball. This is an OV-10 Bronco, built in the mid-60s, developed for the Vietnam War in the forward air control role. And actually used quite successfully in Vietnam, and then later in the first Gulf War as well.
So what's it like to fly, Tony? Because obviously it's quite high off the ground with the undercarriage legs. Is it an easy aircraft to taxi and to take off?
Yeah, it's an absolute joy to fly. It's built for doing a job, so the pilot doesn't have to worry about what's happening in the airplane. So it's a stick and rudder airplane, really. Very simple to operate. It's very agile. It was designed to plus 10G load rating. So you can throw it around. It's fully aerobatic. I mean, it's just like the most fun you can ever have in an airplane.
So what kind of roles did this aircraft do, Tony?
Yeah, first role was forward air control, as I said before,
yep.
Counterinsurgency, which basically is flying over the front line where the troops are in close contact, making out the good guys from the bad guys, coordinating the attack with all means available. So this is not only the means of the airplane, but it was more like coordinating the attack using artillery, naval, the ground troops themselves. So the airplane carried in service 7 different radios to be able to speak to all the different services. Wow. And then make sure they all together took out the bad guys. So this was a very, the airplane was very much loved by the ground troops, on the good side.
So on the flight deck and the cockpit as such, is it all steam gauges? Is it high tech or?
It's fully steam gauge. It's typical US cockpit you'll find in the 60s. So you find a lot of instruments which are in a Phantom or in F-104 Starfighter as well, which I think is great. You know, I mean, if one instrument fails, it's only one instrument that fails and not the whole screen. And they're all military standard instruments, so they're quite easy to find and quite easy to get serviced still today.
Yeah. So Tony, tell us a bit about yourself. How did the aviation kind of passion start with you? Where did you start from? PPL up to where you are now?
Yeah, I started with a PPL back in '89. I did some glider flying that way before that, and then that progressed to a CPL. So I'm a fully civil pilot. I don't have a military background, and I got about 5,000 hours now in twin turboprop airplanes.
So it must safe to say you must have a big garage back at home to store this aircraft.
That's correct. We got a hangar which is about 1,200 square meters.
So what other things do you do? I mean, obviously we're here at Biggin Hill today. Do you go all around the other air shows around Europe?
Yeah, this year has been a very successful year again, and we've been in Holland, Germany, Czech Republic. We're going to Hungary at the end of the season. We've been all over the UK. We're going to Northern Ireland, so we pretty much cover the whole of Europe this year.
So this is one of the aircraft. I mean, for me personally, I the first time I've seen one of these on a display, flying display. How many of these aircraft, are still operational flying?
Yeah, there was 360 built back in the day, in the beginning of the 70s, and at the moment I'm guessing like California Fire Department is flying 14 in California in exactly the same role that the airplane was designed for, which is coordinating an attack, but on the fire this time, so a more peaceful purpose. So they got 14. There is 2 flying at the moment in Europe. We got a second one which is coming online, so we'll have 3 in Europe. And then in the States there is 2 civil ones flying as well, and there is a new outfit, OV-10 Squadron, who are restoring a couple of OV-10s as well. The first one they got back in the air like just a month ago.
So how is it, or how easy is it to keep these aircraft flying? Obviously spare parts and maintenance and engineering. Is it something you do yourself with the aircraft, or?
Yeah, we're fully equipped for doing the maintenance on this aircraft under our UKCA approvals. It's not a very difficult airplane to maintain. It's like a standard twin turboprop. To find spare parts so far has proven not to be too difficult. So we're quite happy with the airplane, and I don't see any problem whatsoever in keeping the airplane in the air for the foreseeable future, which basically means 20 to 30 years or so.
Wow.
The engines are Garretts. You'll find them on plenty of other turboprops, and they're actually still being built new today. It's a very early model of a Garrett, but however, I mean, the internal parts for the engines are still being built by Honeywell.
So plans for the future, Tony? What have you got? Is there any plans you've got for the future? Are you going to stick with the aircraft, or is there any other sort of displays or things you want to try?
It's too much fun, this airplane, so we're definitely going to stick with this one. We've got a second one which is near the end of its restoration, so we're hoping to have 2 online, and who knows, there will be a third, a fourth, and a fifth one even.
Wow, to see 4 of these flying in formation would be absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it would be absolutely awesome. I mean, it's like it's an amazing airplane, and there is some footage you can find on the internet of 5 Broncos or more even flying in formation, and it's an awesome sight and sound.
So Tony, whereabouts are you based yourself with the aircraft?
Yeah, we're based in Flanders Fields, very close to Ypres, which is on the French-Belgian border, just an hour's drive from Calais, which puts us right in the center of Europe. So it's a good place to be, to cover like the whole of Europe airshow-wise.
So for your journey here to Biggin Hill, from where you're based, was it one hit, or did you have to stop in various places on the way over?
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, we've got a range of like 800 to 1,000 nautical miles. Wow. It's only 150 miles, Biggin Hill to where we're based, so it's an easy 40 minutes, one hop
40
flight.
Minutes?
Yeah, 40
wow.
minutes.
What sort of speeds does aircraft do at a cruise?
Cruise is 200 knots. The VNE is 350, but you have to point the nose quite down in order to reach 350.
And she has autopilot?
Not at all. It's all flown manually.
Wow.
All the time. No autopilot, anything whatsoever. And it's a neutrally stable airplane, so you have to stay with it all the time.
So it's a real pilot's aircraft?
It's absolutely a real pilot's airplane, yeah.
Tony, before we wrap up, just one last question before we finish. It's a question we ask all the pilots that we interview on the show. Kind of put you on the spot question. And given the chance to fly any aircraft in the world, be it retired or still flying, commercial, general aviation, military, you could go and fly now, what would it be?
Oh, I think I would probably stick with the Bronco.
We stick with the Bronco.
Yeah.
You love the Bronco.
I do, yes. I mean, it's a fun airplane to fly. It's very versatile. I mean, we've been to the most amazing places worldwide. We're planning a trip to the US, which is very, very doable with this airplane. We've been to the Far East. We've been, to so many places, and even to very small venues, like if you have an air show on a small grass strip or so, 600 meters to 800 meters will do us fine. So I mean, we're so pleased with this aircraft. We don't really want to part with it, and it's so much fun to fly at the same time. Obviously you can think of many other airplanes you ever would like to fly, but this suits us fine.
Oh, it's fantastic. So for our listeners on the show, can they go somewhere to find out more about what you do?
Yeah, we do have a website, www.broncodemoteam.com, and we're on Facebook as well under the same name, Bronco Demo Team, and on Instagram you can find us on social media all over the place.
Well, great. Well, Tony, thanks very much for your time and talking about this amazing aircraft. It's been great to meet you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, and totally our pleasure. Thanks for
Thank you.
by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have to make a special mention to everyone who helped us at Biggin Hill this year. We were treated like royalty.
It was fantastic. Yeah,
I think, guys, hands up who wants to go back next year.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, without fail. It was good. I mean, and you and Nev, you had fantastic access, didn't you? I mean, they were so helpful in getting some great interviews sorted, weren't they?
Yeah, and I did send our helpful team their little P2K gift. So,
did you? Very good. Yes,
so
indeed. Now, that wasn't the only air show that we attended this year, was it, Carlos?
No, because me and Nev jetted across on a lovely brand new A350-1000 with, obviously, the UK's prestigious airline, BA. And we flew to the Dubai Air Show for what is one of the best air shows, I think, that I've been to. And we had a chance to walk around many stands, but one of the stands that caught mine and Nev's eye was the stand brought to us by Rolls Royce. And I got the chance to speak to Jason Sutcliffe all about the Rolls Royce engines and what Rolls Royce are doing with their technology.
So you join me here on the Rolls Royce stand, and I'm here with Jason. And Jason, welcome onto the show.
Thank you.
And thanks for taking the time out to come and speak with us about this amazing engine that's behind us here. So just tell us about this engine.
Okay, so this is the Trent XWB. It's currently the world's most efficient large aero engine. Built in Derby in the UK. It powers the A350, and that's both variants. So you have the 84K will do the A350-900, and the 97K will power the A350-1000.
So me and Nev travelled here this morning, early hours this morning. We landed here in Dubai, and we actually flew over on BA's A350-1000.
Okay.
And me and Nev both agreed it's probably the quietest takeoff that we've ever experienced on an airliner. And it's down to the engine, really.
Absolutely. So the bypass ratio on these engines, about 9.3 to 1. So the majority of the thrust will come from the cold air rather than the core, which provides the temperature and the heat. So, noise, extremely important nowadays, environmentally as well. So you can imagine with a lower noise signature, you can land earlier at airports, you can take off later, and you can save the airline not only money, but also give the customer value because they can reduce those ticket prices.
So Jason, on a technical view, I mean, looking at the engine behind us, it looks very uniform, how everything is laid out. I mean, when you look at some of the engines back at some of the museums of some of the older generation of engines, it's all a bit of a mess of wires, but this looks really uniform. Is that purely by design?
It's by design. So we can virtually design our engines before they're actually coming to service, and we can also virtually maintain the engines before they come to service. So I think we moved about 130 parts on this engine before the design was completed, and that was purely using computer-aided design and our mechanics to try and understand how we're going to boroscope this, what parts do we need to move, how can we make it more efficient, and that I think is really key. But also on all Trent engines, what you have here, this is the dry side of the engine on the fan case, and on the other side is the wet side. So you'll have the oil pumps, fuel pumps and so forth on the other side, and here you'll have all the EC and all the electrical parts, which I think is really key when it comes to sort of being very efficient. And if you notice, they're on the outside of the fan case, so they're easy to access. So in my other life, I was an engineer, and on the flight line, especially in temperatures like this, the last thing you want to do is go into a really hot engine, burning your fingers and trying to take parts off. Here, they're already in a cold place. So it's a really, really unique way of doing it and ensuring that the mechanics and the turnaround times are much quicker than they would be.
So the engine itself, obviously Rolls Royce, it's quite a thoroughbred. There's been some of the well-known engines like the RB211 that powered the TriStar. One of our favourite aircraft, I will just say, Jason is a big fan of the TriStar as well, so we've got a shared passion there. But where do you see kind of engine technology going in the future? Because obviously this is the latest technology.
Sure.
Where do you think the next kind of step is?
So just to go where we've come from, just to get us up to date, 101 years ago now, there was an air race that went from London to Darwin. And that air race was powered, one of the aircraft that won that was powered by the Rolls Royce's first ever engine, which is the Rolls Royce Eagle engine on the Vickers Vimy, okay? Now, just to give you an idea of how far the technology's advanced between then and now, the Vickers Vimy would fly approximately 37,000 miles in between overhauls, okay? Today's modern engine, so this engine you see here, the Trent XWB, will fly 10 million miles in between overhauls.
Wow.
Just let that sink in a little bit, yeah? 10 million miles in between overhauls, which is absolutely fantastic. But I generally don't think we're done with the gas turbine engine yet. Going forward, we have the Rolls Royce Ultrafan, and that is a geared wide body engine. And the Rolls Royce Ultrafan is about a 10 to 15% more efficient than the engines that we have today. Going forward, I think we are at the cusp of the next generation of modern day engines. So the Ultrafan is the next leap, so about 10% more efficient, bearing in mind that each 1% of efficiency attributes to about $125,000 savings per year per aircraft in fuel. Okay, so it's an awful lot of money that we're saving the customers, over $1.6 million. But ultimately, the main goal for sustainability is making our way into the more electrical market. So for some of the advances, we might see hybrids, and I think we'll start off small with the eVTOLs, and then go to the regional aircraft, and then looking at things like blended wings. You see the EFAN X with Airbus that Rolls Royce are doing right now. Rolls Royce procured Siemens e-aircraft company. So we also have now a multitude of electrical capability. So Rolls Royce now have a department called Rolls Royce Electrical, and that is purely looking at industrial power for aircraft, power generation, so on and so forth.
So on that subject quickly of electric, what are your thoughts on the whole electric part? We've talked about on the show, aircraft, commercial airliners being powered by potentially electric.
So I think at the moment we're on that cusp. Yeah. Maybe the VHS Betamax. So is it hydrogen? Is it electric? We'll be, looking at all those solutions. We spend over £1.2 billion a year on research and development, and that's really important for our future. Not only for Rolls-Royce, but for the environment, for sustainability, and to ensure that we make sure that we are here in the next 100 years. We're 101 years old. We want to be here around for the next 100 years. So in terms of electric aircraft, as I say, I think we'll start small and we'll grow in size once we get that capability. Look at battery life. Yeah, the size of batteries now. You saw the Nissan Leaf.
That's it. Yeah.
I'm just going Top Gear, for example. There's a car on there, Nissan Leaf. It was a 10-year-old car, brand new. It would do, I think it was about 220 miles with one charge. Now it does 30. 10 years later. So I think being able to harness that power source, maybe through fuel cells, is something that we really need to look at going forward. But I think early 20s you'll see the eVTOLs, and I think it's going to be more of a regulatory issue than a can we make it and design it and get it flying, because it's not just making it and flying it, it's also about the airspace. We need the FAA, EASA to certify these aircraft, and if they can't get their head around it, then there isn't a business case. So I think we all need to work together as an industry to make sure that this happens going forward, because sustainability, that has to happen.
Jason, before we wrap up, if I may ask a bit about your past, how you got to where you are now with Rolls-Royce?
Sure.
Obviously your background as...
So I joined the Air Force, Royal Air Force, as an aircraft engineer in 1997. Spent nearly 20 years in the Royal Air Force, and then came to Rolls-Royce about 13 years ago. I've done various roles in operations, customers management, and now in marketing, and I enjoy this. You can probably imagine it's Yeah, I now live in the UAE. Work at our customer service centre, so we have a hub within the UAE that supports our customers in the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia. And it's a great company to work for, great place to live. So yeah, it's all good.
So before we close the interview, then, Jason, we always ask the people we interview, the pilots and people within the industry, and especially you with your background, it's an important question for you.
Okay.
Given the chance to fly any aircraft, be it commercial or military, retired or still in service now, and you could just go outside now, jump in, take out for a spin, what would that be?
Spitfire.
Well done, good choice. So Jason, on behalf of the Plane Talking UK podcast, thanks for taking time out of your day to speak with us today. I'm sure the listeners will absolutely love to listen to what you've told us today. It's been great to talk to you, and thanks very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, no worries.
Oh wow! I mean, guys, it looks like you had the most amazing time. I mean, Nev? What was the highlight for you at the Dubai Air Show?
Everything, actually, because I'd never been to the air show before, and what I really liked was the access to everything that we got. It was well worth getting the media accreditation for it, and of course we had the opportunity, as you might have seen earlier in the year, of going up the tower.
Oh, of course, at the ATC tower,
yeah. So that was great, but really enjoyed all of it, and we're definitely going to go back there again. I think.
Very
worthwhile.
Carlos, what about you? What was the highlight for you? I mean, that's not the first time you've been. That's the second time you've been, wasn't it?
Yeah, the second time, but this was by far the best time, mainly because I had Nev with me.
Of course, absolutely.
And, it was nice to have obviously have Nev with me and have Nev's chums, because we had various meetups as well as control tower with various members of Nev's extended aviation family, or Nev Tech family, I should say. And we had some fun, didn't we, Nev? We had obviously with the tower visit, we had a nice meal out and stuff, and it was Dubai show. I know it's a bit restricted. It's not a public show, so you can't just rock up, buy a ticket and rock up. But it does make for a really good show, and they still put on a very good air display regardless for the people that are there. Well, so there are still flying acts and stuff on. And,
I guess that's the advantage about being in the desert, isn't it? You haven't got to worry about any of these building restrictions or anything like that.
No, and let's not forget as well, Nev, that we left the Dubai at probably the right time.
Yeah, because the weather was great when we were there, but on the Wednesday, I think it was, there was an absolute downpour, and I don't know what happened to the show, but last time round they had to cancel parts of the show because it was so wet, and also all of the stands and what have you outside got a good soaking as well. So we turned up and left just at the right time, I think.
Wow. Okay.
And you didn't get sunburned there.
No, I didn't know. That's remarkable.
Quite an achievement in Dubai, absolutely. Now, obviously, you guys mentioned that you flew out there on the A350. We were very lucky. One of our listeners, a lovely chap with the name of Chris Griggs, he very kindly sent in to us a little review of another new aircraft that sort of hit the sky, shall we say, this year. And that was his little review of a certain A220.
You join me at Gatwick Airport, where I await my first flight on board an Airbus A220 aircraft, named Bombardier C Series. This particular aircraft, performing Air Baltic Flight 652 to Riga, is a 300 model, registration Yankee Lima Charlie Sierra Juliet, delivered to the airline in July 2018. It is one of 3 aircraft in Air Baltic's fleet sporting a special livery. These liveries show stylised versions of the flags of Latvia, Lithuania, and in this case Estonia. As the aircraft pulls on stand, you're able to get a good look at how large the Pratt & Whitney PW1524G geared turbofan engines are. And we'll have another quick look just before we step on board. Looking at a popular flight tracking website, we can see that our route took us around London, towards Essex, before turning east over the Netherlands, Germany, the Baltic Sea and into Latvia. There was a slight delay, but looking at previous flight data, that's not unusual for this particular flight. First impressions of the cabin are that it's light and airy, with large windows and a high ceiling for an aircraft of its class. The seats are wide with reasonable legroom, The tray table is, unusually, supported by a central pillar surrounded by 2 small mesh pockets. The in-flight entertainment consists of PTUK, or whatever else you bring with you, and there is a large pocket at the top of the seat containing the safety information card and a rather substantial in-flight magazine. There are small screens throughout the cabin that show a moving map, the safety demonstration, and lots of adverts. Towards the end of the flight, they show gate information for connecting flights. Unless you pay to reserve a seat, you are randomly allocated one at check-in. Unfortunately, mine was the furthest you can get from the window, so you'll have to forgive the shaky camera work. But let's listen to how quiet the engines are at takeoff. The engine and aerodynamic noise remained low throughout the flight. I didn't notice any difference in the humidity or pressure of the cabin air compared to other aircraft, but I did feel more refreshed after the flight than usual, even for short haul. The large windows also let in a lot of lateral light, adding to the improved atmosphere. After nearly 3 hours, the slimline seats were beginning to feel rather hard, and it was time to bid the aircraft goodbye. On my return flight from Tallinn, I was able to chat with the captain. He started flying gliders as a young man, before becoming a commercial pilot, first flying the Soviet Yakolev Yak-40 before moving to Western types such as the Boeing 737, and spent the last year on the A220. Looking around the flight deck, the first thing you notice is the size of the flight displays, and for an aircraft not designed by Airbus, it feels very Airbus-like, with the side stick controls. Thanks for watching.
Now, regular listeners and viewers may remember that back in November, Armando had a very candid chat with Captain Nick about Remembrance or Armistice Day or Veterans Day. After they'd had their little chat, I took the opportunity to ask a few questions about what Remembrance Day actually means to them. Nick, I just wanted to sort of chip in, if I may, and ask the question. Obviously, I mean, Remembrance Day is a huge thing for you. I understand. I mean, presumably, because of the close relationships that you were talking about earlier, there must be. I mean, it must completely change how, as an outsider, if you like. I mean, I'm remembering because I'm wanting to say thank you for those who have done something that I know I wouldn't be capable of doing. But obviously, when you say these very personal stories, I mean, obviously you will have lost people during your service. I mean, that must give it special meaning to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even though I never took part in live operations, our Phantom base, we were attending funerals pretty frequently during my first tour, and that was only 3 years long. I'm trying to think how many crews were perished, but there were certainly 6 or 7 of my colleagues on both squadrons who disappeared. And it was always in the forefront of our mind. But I make the point that when you're a young man, that's one of the reasons that young men are so good at fighting wars, is you haven't really grown a full appreciation of the dangers you're putting yourself into. But I do have an enormous feeling for those who have gone behind us or in the past, because they've had a lifetime to reflect on what they did and saw as young men. The young men that are fighting now and being injured, well, they deserve our huge support. But I think it's after those events, when you are perhaps 5, 10, 15, 20, even 50 years down the road, and you find that you are having trouble coping with the memories of the things you did or saw. And I think it's just so important for us to continue to remember that people who have served in seen death, not all of them cope with it well. And, we just have to have that level of understanding for anyone who's been through severe trauma. And we should never trivialize someone who's having a problem with their mental health following events like that. And it just makes it all the more important to remember and contribute and look after these folk, because they have been through a terrible period of their lives when they have been in a war. And, we should be forever grateful for that.
I mean, mental health obviously is a big topic these days. It's very much in the forefront of everybody's minds at the moment. Do you think, in general, that certainly the armed forces and things are better at dealing with it, perhaps being more aware?
I think we are, but it's a two-way street. And I think there is a feeling sometimes that people aren't being proactive enough. But don't forget, there is an emphasis on you as an ex-serviceman to recognize you're having a problem and to seek help, because if you take that step, you will often find that there is more help than you genuinely need, and that people will move heaven and earth to try to solve your problems. But if you hide away from society and stop engaging and let your troubles fester, that's going to make life really hard. And then saying that no one cares is probably perhaps not quite accurate. So my feeling is, having dealt with my own problems, is that declaring you have a problem is probably the most important step you can make, and then seeking assistance to help you through that is the next step. And then when you do, you'll then find that the organizations out there who are committed to guiding you and assisting you and making you well again will be only too pleased to help.
Armando, if I may ask a similar sort of set of questions to you, really. There, now, obviously, you have seen very active service. Obviously, you were in, special forces. I know you can't say any more than that, really, in regard to your time in the army. Presumably, again, for the same reasons. The Veterans Day, as I believe you call it in the States, has very special meaning, I dare say.
Yeah. So, one of the differences between Remembrance Day and Veterans Day, I think it changed for us in the 50s, was it became a day to honor all veterans, current and past. Yeah, for me, it's I always took the time to remember those, especially in my community. And I remember, the call signs: Ratchet 33, Demise 25, Independence 08, Talon 33, and Wrath 11. Those are the aircraft that have gone down with my comrades, and I've attended their memorial services, and in addition to that, the services for comrades in other services that we were supporting. So when you're in combat, and I never went to Afghanistan, I always went to Iraq, and there was more than enough times where you get a notification early in the morning that somebody had lost their life the previous night, and we would all show up the next morning in your deployed location, and we would muster up and get information, and it's weird to say that deploying is easy. Life is easy when you're deployed, because you don't have to worry about life. It's almost an escape. There's no bills to pay. You don't have to worry about what to wear. You don't have to worry about just all the regular day-to-day life challenges, and you can really immerse yourself in something like that. But then you have those days where it all becomes very real, and those were some of the most poignant times in my service.
Now, I'm lucky enough that I know you fairly well, Armando, and I know that you're not too proud, if you like, to know to ask for help, for example, if you felt you ever needed to. But I mean, what advice would you give, having recently retired, to those who perhaps are finding life difficult?
Well, this it's interesting. It's almost overwhelming, the amount of resources that we have now. And I look at my dad's service. My dad served a few tours in Vietnam, and those folks didn't have nearly the amount of resources. And it was just a different time where if you were suffering or struggling, where you almost had to keep it in, you know, and you were looked upon as maybe weak, maybe if you let those emotions show. That's not the case today. And there's so many resources out there, specifically here in the US. You know, you have Military One Source. I just discovered one where mental health and behavioral health providers donate 1 hour a week to a veteran, free of charge, just to provide an avenue for you to go talk to. And it doesn't have to be any specific PTSD or have this combat thing that I think about that just keeps bugging me. It could be just a life problem, because as we talked about earlier, Nick, it's a way of life. It's sometimes the work part is the easy part, and it's easy to forget about the other life challenges that are getting thrown at you. And sometimes those are the things that you need to go talk to someone about in order for you to be able to do your job better and to be able to focus on it. And I think it's just changed quite a bit as far as the amount of resources, but still, I don't know the current numbers, but we're up to 22 veterans a day in the US. 22 veterans a day take their own lives because they can't deal with, those are the wrong words, because there's something weighing on them so heavily that they're struggling to find a way out. And often that is service related, and it's just incredibly important for those folks to go out and seek help. But it's important for us, Nick and I, and everyone like us, to look out for those teammates and point them the right way.
That's exactly right, and so important, because not everyone is capable of recognizing that they're in such a dreadful position that they might take a decision that we would never want them to even consider. So I think you're quite right, and that's one of the great reasons for staying in close touch with your colleagues, because of course, whilst you've got a buddy looking after you, you know very well that he's not going to let you do anything stupid. He's going to give you a shake and point you in the right direction, take you to somewhere where he knows you can get help. So staying in touch, I think, is absolutely vital when you leave the service.
Agreed.
Well, gents, on behalf of everyone, I'd like to essentially say thank you to both of you for your service. And I think it's very important we all remember those who went before us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Many thanks.
So if you remember, cast your memories back to what was a nice summer here in the UK.
Cool, yeah.
By all regards, it was a good summer. And we had a meet up at Duxford. And Matt's aviation knowledge is growing. It's definitely growing.
That's
I think
a
we
word.
can all agree that Matt's aviation knowledge has started to, what shall I say?
Blossom. Let's go with blossom.
And blossom.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Matt had a very good opportunity indeed. And this was all off the back of Matt, because Matt done this himself. He actually collared Captain Nick at Duxford. And Matt,
it was all a little bit by accident, really, because we were in the American hangar at Duxford. As I say, it was a great meetup. We were wandering around and all that. We ended up in the American hangar, and of course, in there was the F4, that a variant of which obviously Nick used to fly. And to be honest with you, I really couldn't miss the opportunity to hear a little bit about his love for the F4.
Nick,
Hello, nice to see you. Obviously, we're at Duxford, having a great day.
Oh, I'm enjoying myself so much, man. There's some lovely people here, you know.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, shame I haven't met any of them yet.
Right, okay. Yeah, all strangers, absolutely. We're standing next to, you were saying actually this is the Navy variant.
Yeah, that's right. This is the Navy F4, because we're in the American hangar.
That's right, we don't mind that though, do we?
Well, no, an F4 is an F4, and it was very similar to the British F4s, to be truthful. It was the F4 that had most similarity. Had American engines in it, J79s, which we would have loved, but when our government decided to buy the F4, they said, well, we want a major British component put into these F4s because we're buying your American airplane. And the only thing they could think of was to put a Rolls Royce engine in there, as opposed to the American engine. The only engine they could think of to put in was a Rolls Royce Spey. Now, the Spey was an airliner engine. It wasn't really built for fighters. And it was a big, fat engine, and when they put it in there, it made a big, fat Phantom, sadly. It also really had problems having a reheat fitted, and not many civil airliners had reheats. Can you think of one?
No.
Nev can.
Nev's nodding his head. Go
on,
Nev.
Nev.
The Concorde, of course.
The Concorde, of course. Oh, no, really?
I know, all right. I never said I was any good at this.
So the Concorde was the only civil airliner, apart from Western. There were some Russian ones, of course, that had reheat. But so, big problems fitting reheat to a civil engine. So when they first tried it, it kept blowing the engine out, or it kept surging the engine. And they decided that the only way this reheat was going to work was if they made it light very slowly. Now, 5 seconds may not seem a long time to you, but in the military world, when you need that extra thrust, 5 seconds is a huge amount of time. And that's how long it took us to light the reheats in the British Phantoms, because of the fact that we had these big fat American engines in there. So you'd rock the throttles outboard and you'd smash them forward to get reheats, and then you watch the nozzles, and the first thing they did was open a bit, which reduced your thrust even more, and then they'd go to quarter, half, and then they'd finally light the full power, and you'd get the real whoomph as you were pushed back in your seat and the reheats light. But that's, you know, that's a long time to wait for that extra thrust, so that was a disadvantage.
So what sort of speed were you able to get out of? So let's go with the American variant here.
This variant was truly Mach 2 capable, and its maximum airspeed would have been around 600 knots, somewhere around there.
And how would that compare to with the English variant?
Well, we had the same statistics, but in reality, when you do your cutaway shot, you'll notice that this has a nice slim fuselage. From the intakes, the fuselage slims down and then fattens out towards the end, and that's called area rule. And the idea is to keep the cross-sectional area of the aircraft resembling an ogival body. Basically 2 bullets, one attached to another. It goes from a point to a fat bit to a point, and that's an extremely efficient shape for supersonic speed. When we put our big fat engines in, no longer did it have this Coke bottle effect, this wasting in the middle. It was fat in the middle. So it went pointy, fat, 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 pointy, which wasn't very good. So we could never get Mach 2 out of our aircraft. It was not as efficient. 1.8 was about the fastest I ever got one of our Phantoms to.
So what environment would you tend to be using these particular aircraft for? What was their main tactical purpose?
When we got them, they were a true multi-combat aircraft, a multi-role combat aircraft. We used them in Germany doing ground attack. We used them for photo reconnaissance. We used them off our carriers in the naval version, and we used them in air defense as well. They had all that capability. It was really quite a remarkable airplane. So it could bomb things. It had pretty impressive guns. It had lots of missiles, so it could do a multitude of roles, all of which it did very well indeed for the period.
So is this particular aircraft, was this what you predominantly flew when you were in the Air Force?
Yeah, I spent more or less 10 years at Lucas, 6 of which I would have been flying this. I got over 1,000 hours sitting in the cockpit there, which doesn't seem a lot in civil flying, but in military flying, 1,000 hours gives you a lot of piles.
Yeah. Right, okay. Paying for that now then.
Yeah.
How long would each mission usually last?
Well, with a normal tank of gas, so we had 2 tanks, wing tanks, we call Sergeant Fletchers, and a full fuselage. We'd do about an hour and a half mission. If you were doing combat, it would be well less than an hour. And that included transit. So you go 20-minute transit, fight for 20 minutes, 20-minute transit home. So you could eat up your fuel pretty quickly. If you put the maximum fuel load on it, so 3 big external tanks, full internals, you could empty the aircraft in 20 minutes total.
Wow.
So that's, in full reheat. That's how fast the fuel pipes are like this big. And that's what was necessary to feed the engines, to keep that round of thrust going, so you could empty it very quickly. But commonly, we wouldn't waste that amount of fuel that quickly. We'd do 2-hour missions. If we had 3-bagger, 3 tanks on, it would be a 2.5-hour mission. If we're on QRA with a tanker supporting us, so we could go back to and refuel whenever we wanted, I've done 6.5, 7-hour missions. And on long transit, same thing. So we could fly non-stop from North Scotland to Cyprus, so long as we had tankers there to support us. And we would regularly take the aircraft across the Atlantic. Again,
so air-to-air refuelling, essentially.
Yeah. So just on the far side of the cockpit, there's a long, thin panel, and at the flick of the switch, a big probe with a knobbly bit on the end, which is probably best not described, considering you like to keep this clean.
Family show, ladies and gentlemen, family
Thrusts
show.
Forward, so it is actually telescopic and stops about a beam just forward of the pilot's head. And that was our air-to-air refueling probe. And then we'd come up behind a tanker who would be trailing a long hose with a basket on the end. And we would line up, try not to watch the basket, because that led to trouble. You would line up on markings underneath the fuselage, wait for the lights to change, because it was all done, if you could, without radio, on a sequence of coloured lights on the back of the tanker. And you close up, come to a waiting position, and then walk forward at a walking pace, which sounds very odd when you're doing several hundred miles an hour, but literally you close on the tanker at a walking pace and fly up the line at the hose, and hopefully the basket would be taken aside by the bow wave of the aircraft to just the right spot to nestle under the end of your probe, and you'd make contact, continue to push up, and all the valves would then turn in the hoodoo, the pod that the hose came from, and the tanker guy would start giving you fuel, and within a few minutes he'd have topped you up, and you could withdraw and disappear off and go and do some more fighting.
So if you're flying from Scotland to Cyprus, as you were saying, how many times would you need to refuel during that flight?
Yeah, about 4 probably. So we go from Scotland to just around the English Channel. The French never liked us refueling over France. I don't know what it is about the French, but we had to refuel just before we entered French airspace. Then we were a bit desperate when we came out the other side of France and hit the Mediterranean, but we'd have a bracket straight after that. And by that time, the first tankers would have been drier fuel. They couldn't have given us any more, because we're normally in quite a big formation, and lots of us are doing this, which has a certain amount of peer pressure, because everybody's watching you try and make your contacts, and every time you miss, scores are taken. And we know the first round...
8.4,
the first round is always paid for when we landed at Cyprus by the man who missed the most.
Right.
So he would then dive off into somewhere like Sardinia, and another tanker would come out and join us, and we'd have another series of refueling brackets into Cyprus, and then we'd arrive in Cyprus usually with so much fuel we'd have to burn it off by beating up the airfield.
So whose responsibility is it, essentially? Is it the tanker stays where it is and you go to the tanker, or is it a little bit of both in regards to hooking up to take on fuel?
Yeah, there was a series of different types of joins. Generally speaking, the fighters like to do it because our life...
More agile.
Yeah, and our lives were spent doing intercepts. So the navigator would control the intercept and roll you out at about half a mile behind the tanker. You just close up that last bit. But if we had an unserviceable radar or couldn't turn, then the tanker could do his own thing. But it took a lot of setting up, and they weren't very practiced at it. So,
you talk about this aircraft with a lot of love.
Most certainly, yeah, absolutely. It was a real warhorse.
and I think a very impressive and terrifying airplane, quite honestly. But I spent a lot of time flying it, so yeah, I've got a great love for it.
Thanks, Nick.
Pleasure.
Well, Matt, I never knew you had a passion for grey stuff.
Look, let's be honest. Captain Nick can make anything grey sound fascinating. There's no two ways.
All the choice of all those commercial airliners parked outside at Duxford, the VC-10, the A211, and you chose an F4 Phantom.
Yeah, I know, but it's what was fascinating for me though was learning all about like refueling and things like that. So it wasn't just about the grey stuff. There was so much more to go with it. Anyway, leave me alone.
It's a shame.
I enjoyed
it. They didn't let Nick in just to start it up.
Yes, that's true. I tell you what though, I love going to museums and air shows with Nick because you learn so much about the stuff that he was involved with.
It's like the exhibits sort of like trigger a memory, don't they? They sort of trigger him off to sort of talk about something new, which is fantastic. It was such a good meetup as well, wasn't it? We were again. I know we mentioned earlier that we were so lucky with the weather, but I mean, I've never had a day go so fast as it did at Duxford.
We need to do that again for 2020. I think we definitely need to do that.
Well, there's possibly something similar in the pipeline already, isn't there? For sort of middle of the year sometime, isn't there? So watch this space. More details to come.
So, obviously, we're talking about some of our favourite parts of 2019. So we're going to hand things over to Armando because he has a very special thought and remembering piece of 2019. So we're going to hand things over to the legend that is Armando.
Hey guys, so for this next interview, Megan and I had the pleasure of interviewing Barry and Sandra Payne at Oshkosh. So Barry and Sandra were flying their Comanche across the world or around the world. And they were just an awesome couple that we not only enjoyed interviewing, but they were just fun to talk to. And I think the interview was maybe 10 minutes, but we ended up talking to them for 30, 45 minutes. They were just a good, inspiring couple, which is why I chose that as my favorite segment for 2019. What did you think of them?
They were super down to earth. The fact that they were traveling all around the world and kind of didn't really think much of it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So here is my favorite interview for 2019.
All right. So team, I'm here with Miss Sandra Payne and Barry Payne, who are flying a Comanche all the way across the world. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Armando. Thank you.
So you're flying across the world. How did you get this idea?
Well, it was, we've run out of long-range flying to do in the South Pacific area, and we thought, what's next? And Sandra said, well, we should fly around the world. And I said, well, why not? Let's go do it.
Now, she was telling me you guys have flown this Comanche over some pretty open expanses of water, haven't you? Just in the past 10 years.
We have, and we live in New Zealand, and anywhere you want to go seriously outside New Zealand, you've got a lot of water to fly over to get to the next bit of land or country. So, we're quite used to flying over water, and in fact, I bought the Comanche so that we could do just that with ease. And,
So what was it about the I've flown the Comanche, and I know I fell in love with it as soon as I started flying it. But what was it about the Comanche that you were looking for that you said that's the right airplane to do this?
Well, it wasn't my choice to begin with. I was looking for an aeroplane that we could do just what we're doing now with, comfortably. And a good friend of mine said, well, you need a Comanche. And I said, no, I don't, thinking they were too old. But when I looked at the performance specs, he was right. And this Comanche it's a light aeroplane. We can carry the fuel load and ourselves and some very light baggage and survival equipment and take off at gross weight.
Now, Ms. Sandra, you're also a pilot, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So how do you manage the workload or the planning going across the ocean and such an endeavor?
Barry and I fly as a crew, and we decided we'd look at what our strengths and weaknesses were, and so he does all the takeoffs and landing and twiddling with the the autopilot. I manage the systems and the fuel and the human factors, making sure our oxygen levels are at the right level, hydration, all the things that I call housework on the flight. And together, I think we fly as a pretty nice team.
Well, that's the perfect marriage too, isn't it?
A very good one, actually. Yeah, so we've been married 50 years.
Congratulations.
I've been flying 50 years, and we've got 50 flights around the world.
So 50 years at Oshkosh as well.
Yeah,
it's the stars have aligned this year to do this, right?
Yeah, certainly have.
Now, what kind of planning, we were talking a little bit about weather planning, just in what time of year do you go, but what kind of planning considerations does it take to go across the world?
Well, obviously, fuel is the big criteria. Avgas is not as available as it used to be many years ago. So our routing is primarily around where the fuel's available. And then, of course, where it's... In many cases, we just want to go to those places and have a look. So that really set our planning.
Now, you were saying that you've crossed the equator a couple of times now.
We will do. We've crossed it once, and when we go back, we'll cross it again.
And no major weather problems or challenges?
When we came up through the intertropical conversion zone, we were expecting a little bit of turbulence and maybe not such a good flight, but we were blessed and we had a really nice smooth ride. The interesting thing is you could see the pattern ahead of you, and the clouds were quite open, so we were allowed to just go around them and keep going. So it was a pretty nice flight.
Now, what's the longest leg that you're doing that is over water, or the furthest from an airport that you will be?
We've already done that. It was from Guam to Kagoshima in Japan, and that was a 9-hour flight over water. And it really was over water. There wasn't a bird, a fish, a plane, or an island anywhere along the line. But it was a good flight, and we really enjoyed it.
Have you made any special modifications to the airplane for this trip?
No, really, it's the airplane as we use it every time we fly. It has, as a Comanche, it has an extra fuel tank in the back, but that's an STC fuel tank for the Comanche. So we've got 140 gallons, which gives us about 11 and a half hours. And so literally, and I maintain it, so I'm the engineer as well. So we literally pushed it out of the hangar, put our survival gear on board, and set out.
That's great. And can you describe the route a little bit? So you've left New Zealand, and what's the overall plan?
We left New Zealand on 28th of April, and we've allowed ourselves a 6-month window to do the trip. We went from New Zealand to Australia, Australia to Papua New Guinea to Guam, Guam to Japan, 3 stops in Russia, and then across to Nome in Alaska. And we've done a bit of a tiki tour, I think you would call it, in the USA, and we went out to New York, and then we went down to Tulsa in Oklahoma, and then back on up here to Oshkosh. So this is kind of about halfway. From here we go into Canada, over to Goose Bay, up to Greenland, Iceland, and into Scotland, England. And then we're hoping to go to Switzerland, Poland, and then to Moscow. And from Moscow we'll go across Russia and into Vladivostok, and then down south home from there.
That's a amazing endeavor that you're taking on. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier was the community aspect of aviation, and how when someone takes on an effort like this, suddenly people start helping you from all over, don't they?
Look, aviation, the general aviation community is worldwide, is smitten with exactly the same virus. and so there's no known antidote, and you just enjoy it. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter where you are. The only difference might be a bit of language, but that's quickly overcome by the fraternity of aviation. Yeah, we have met so many lovely, lovely people across all of the countries we've visited so far, and all I can say is if that was the world, it's a nice place.
I agree, and Oshkosh is the best place to experience that, with people from all walks of life and every country and every kind of airplane here, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, no, amazing. So it's our second visit to Oshkosh, and I can say bringing our airplane here has been one amazing experience, and we're only halfway through.
Well, I wish you all the best, and we actually always end with one question, and since you're both pilots, I'll ask both of you. If you could fly any airplane in the world, current, past, future, and money was no object, other than your beautiful Comanche, because I did take a look at it, it's beautiful, what airplane would that be?
I think here at Oshkosh I've actually fallen in love with the Spartan Executive. And I think I wouldn't mind giving that one a go. Yeah.
And me, I couldn't go past a Mustang. Have to have it to match my motor car.
Well, I think you guys should pass out your cards and your little brochure over there in the Vintage and Warbirds area, and you may get the chance before you take off on Thursday, right?
Yeah. And thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to perhaps meeting up again in the future. But if you ever come down under, do come and see us.
I absolutely will. I have your contact information, and you're leaving here Thursday. So if anybody is listening over in Europe and anywhere on that route that they mentioned, look them up on their website, which I saw, and you can actually, what's the website again?
BazFlyer.com.
And that's Baz, Bravo Alpha Zulu, flyer.com. And you can follow their progress. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So that is it. That's where we're going to start to wrap up our New Year's show for this year. It's safe to say 2019 was a busy year, and definitely brought us some great content for the show. Definitely. And it's worth mentioning as well, before we wrap up the show, that pretty much everything we do on the show is helped and funded by you guys, our Patreon donators to the show. So a big, massive, especially from me and Nev and Matt and Armando, thanks to everyone who very, very kindly donates to the show each month. And it's safe to say, Nev, I mean, for the benefit of some of the listeners, just sort of kind of tell them, where bits and pieces of the money go to.
Yeah, we're always looking for new ways of doing the show. We're looking for replacement equipment all the time and this kind of stuff. And of course, we have to pay for media hosting costs and website hosting costs and that kind of thing. But we hope that this year we've been able to bring you a really improved video quality as well across the YouTube channel when you're watching that. And hopefully as well, you'll notice that the podcast audio quality is good as well. So we strive really hard to bring you the best possible content and audio and video quality from us.
Absolutely, and it's all very kindly paid for by you guys. If you would like to become a Patreon, you can do that by going to the Patreon website. You can just remind me how I spell that. I always get this wrong, isn't it? Patreon, isn't it? It's Patreon.
That's correct.
There, get me. If you're unsure, though, take yourself to our website, www.planetalkinguk.com. On there, you'll find all the links on how you can contribute towards the show. You can, for example, contribute by simply clicking on a link on our website, Shopping with Amazon.
Which I do.
Absolutely. And basically, we get an admin referral fee, if you like, an advertising referral fee. So you can even donate to the show just by doing your shopping, where it doesn't cost you a penny. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, it is podcast@planetalkinguk.com. That's podcast@planetalkinguk.com. Please do that if you'd like to join us for our 300. Spaces are filling up fast. So please do. I think we've only got about 20 spaces left, if I recall. So if you haven't done so already and you want to join us for the 300, 700th, as I say, podcast at planetalkinguk.com. And obviously follow us on social media. Search your favourite social media channel for Plane Talking UK, all as one word.
So that's it then for the New Year's show, and I hope you've all had a fantastic Christmas filled with all the usual delicacies such as quality streets and blimey.
Other chocolate brands are available.
It's going to be apples, oranges, bananas, fruit.
Everybody's back on the diets now. That's it. Christmas and New Year are all over. So that's where we say goodbye, everyone. Take care. We'll see you in 2020, as I say, with the 300th sort of fast approaching. So from everybody here, everybody say goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.